I think the Irish and the Italians were allowed to sell drugs, and they were shown in a different light. They did the same, if not more. Even Chinese gangs down in Chinatown that are still operating, they all sell drugs or have sold drugs to establish wealth. I think Black people were always hunted, and so the narrative is what it is.
On this episode of Consider That, we will be exploring the cult classic Boyz n the Hood and discussing gentrification, race, and revolving barriers to progress for Black inner-city communities. How do external forces foster an environment for gentrification and displacement? What responsibility do we have in the condition of our neighborhoods? What role do father figures play in the ultimate success of our communities? We will examine these questions and much more as we consider Boyz n the Hood.
All right, let's talk about Boyz n the Hood. So here's a synopsis. In this movie, Furious Styles, a hardworking father hoping to raise a responsible son, takes his son Trey and his friend Ricky to visit a billboard that says "Cash for your home." So given the neighborhood, Trey and his friend are concerned for their safety. However, Furious states that Black people can't afford to be afraid of our own people. Now, Furious explains that this message on the board symbolizes gentrification, a process where outsiders drive down the property values in a neighborhood to acquire the property at a discount, drive the residents out, and sell it at a profit. An elder in the community challenges Furious's perspective, arguing that the decreasing property values are not a result of external forces, rather they're a result of violent crimes, selling drugs, and gang activity committed by our own youth in the neighborhood. Furious counter-argues that outsiders have strategically placed those elements in the community. This illustrates the opposing views that many hold on the role of structural barriers versus personal choice in creating cyclical poverty, crime, etc. Y'all get the point. So when you think about the perspective of both of these men, who do you put the responsibility on? Us or the external factors when it comes to poverty, violence, and the drugs that plague our communities?
Well, I think history plays a big role here, in my opinion. When you look at situations prior to Central California in, what are we talking about, 80s, 90s, there were a lot of points where Black people had their stuff together. And white communities came and burned them down. So I think for the umpteenth time, people find a different way that's not necessarily conducive to the overall health of the community. I think those things come out of desperation. You know, there was Black Wall Street. There were thriving Black neighborhoods that, quite frankly, got turned into lakes.
Yeah.
People were drowned and killed. Black people didn't have any rights, and so you could destroy their lives and get away with it. And so I just don't feel it's fair to put it on the generation that said, F that, we're gonna do something else.
I think it's hard because I get what you're saying about our historical obstacles. And then let me know if I'm right. You were saying the next generation probably took it from there, continued doing what the other previous generation had decided they had no choice but to do this, let's say sell drugs. But now it's just become part of the culture. Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I'd just say I understand.
Okay, well, I'm gonna say that. That's what I think has happened. And it's unfortunate, so I get why the elder is saying nah, y'all are doing it, but I think it's a combination. I don't think it's fair to put it on either side. But then to me, the question is, whose responsibility is it to now educate those who have gotten comfortable with, let's just go back to the drugs example, and pull them out of it? Because if it's all you know, then you don't know what you don't know.
I'll make this quick. I think the Irish and the Italians were allowed to sell drugs, and they were shown in a different light. They did the same, if not more. Even Chinese gangs down in Chinatown that are still operating, they all sell drugs or have sold drugs to establish wealth. I think Black people were always hunted, and so the narrative is what it is. But when it comes to who's doing what crime, we're all doing the crime collectively. It's the American way.
Lamont.
I think, look, right, like that's a dynamic scene, probably one of the most influential or descriptive in the movie in relation to today. I think there's a couple elements here. One is you look at the scene, right? Just visually, you mute it and you look at the scene. You'll see the scene, they're on a hill. So they start in this hoopty, I'm sorry, not a hoopty, they start in a really nice car for that time frame. And the car would be probably what a young dude would be driving in a car. That car would be driving if they were maybe hustling or whatever, right? Because it's a nice car. It's a Volkswagen. It's a nice car for that time frame. They pull up on a corner of this hood, which is any hood that you could, any movie from the 90s that you could think of that would have late 80s, early 90s that would in California that you would see generally in the LA area, right? Boom. But as they get out of the car, they come around and then Furious immediately goes up the hill. There's a you have to really look at that, right? And not just face value, but think about what John Singleton was trying to really portray or the message he was getting out to the audience, right? And the two younger brothers were not concerned with getting up the hill. They were concerned at that point with looking around, right? Crabs in a barrel kind of sense. Like, all right, I see these dudes across the street, they got their music going. If they're gonna pull me down, I'm gonna pull one of them down first. He's already up the hill now. He's at the billboard looking at this. And the billboard is in the hood on a hill. So you have to look at that. All right, so fast forward. I think what it is you have the elder come in, the scene, and you have the brothers who come in from across the street, and the brothers and sisters that come in from across the street, they're drinking their 40s, they have their music, but they turn it down, and they're engaged, which is, I think, what Furious wanted to do initially. It wasn't for him to teach his son a lesson and his friend, which I think, albeit that was secondary. I think what he wanted to do was to show, like, y'all, this isn't it here. But he did that by using his son and his friend because they were younger, so they pull in the people from across the street who were younger. And the elder, he pulls them in, right? And so I think like there was a mixture there. But when you look at it, getting outside of all that, what I just said, I think essentially like nobody's wrong, nobody's right. I think we all live, right? Or those characters live in that community. So everybody's responsible for the ground that they're on. I think like I look at like maybe New York, for instance, where I'm from, Brooklyn, and I see people hold on to plots of land that they can never ever own legally. But they held on to it because maybe a lease says, oh, your offspring can occupy this apartment upon your death. So then that's our passing down, but it's not real. We don't own it. It's just a city or a state or federal property that's passing from one to another. And so when you look at that scene, he's preaching some real stuff, but it's beyond just the verbals of what he's saying. I don't want to go on too long because I know we got other people saying stuff here, but I think we have to look at it like, we have to look deeper into that scene to pull out a meaning there.
Yeah. So I think what you're getting at is there's both structural challenges that get, the hood to where it is, but there's also a possible personal responsibility to collectively figure out how we can make things better. I think both are necessary. Is that true? Yeah, there's not one defining road. There's different routes to get to where the end goal. And the end goal, which is great, is like I'm looking at these two candles on a table here, on the middle of it. It doesn't mean we're gonna get to this exact same equation. Like it could be this way, or it could be like that. But that's the end game. It's like our end game is defined by us, not by our oppressors. And the situation was built by our oppressors upon their system. So we're looking at the solution based upon our oppressor solutions. We're never gonna find a valuable answer to our problems there. Yeah. So it takes more than that. That's what Fierce, I think, was trying to get to. Mm-hmm. Michael, I see you stewing. Tell me your thoughts.
Well, Mont's right, but I do think, like, part of the charm of like the chicken or the egg is like, ultimately, it's such a good anecdote because you can't really say which one comes first. Mm-hmm. But like we're not chickens or eggs as Black people, and like we have stuff to do. So like we don't have time to like wax poetically about like if the chicken or the egg comes first. So like if I had to choose if the chicken or the egg comes first in this instance, it's the egg, and the egg is like Black people doing what we have to do to get to get to a solution that benefits all of us. There's certain divides that have to dissolve. but for those divides to dissolve, and for like there to be the unity necessary to like make our cries and our concerns so loud that like the world listens, we have to get our ducks in a row first. And that requires Black people putting aside whatever it is that we like prioritize over unity in exchange for unity. So like ultimately the old man is right, but it's gonna take the galvanizing of a people that can only happen with young people's involvement to get to a place where like we're a fist instead of fingers. It's like we're like a lot of strong fingers, but like you need a fist to like move stuff. So I think to get to the point where we're a fist, we have to like get all the fingers together. And that might take 2 Chainz not rapping about gun violence, or like, you know, the next kid out of Chicago not going the typical route or something. But like those are the kind of sacrifices that I think will have to be made for us to get to a point where like, so we can actually like present our issues to like a planet or people that care enough to contribute to what's best for us, I guess.
So I got a question for you. So to the 2 Chainz or the kids in Chicago, that is their life experience because that's what was around them. I don't think that they're wrong for putting it on wax. I just think that's just what it is.
Sure.
For them. Our glorification of it, I think we can manage that. I think we can do better with that. But it's their truth.
You're not wrong, but there's like a lot of truths.
There are a lot of
truths that like somebody right now has to use the bathroom. Everybody on set don't need to know that. You're not wrong. These kids aren't wrong.
But here's the thing, right? On a deeper note, it's like, if we all agree that the real Rick Ross, what he was saying is true, and drugs were infiltrated in our neighborhoods, and the CIA had something to do with that, right? In which I know that to be true. What the kids got to do with that? Because they're not making guns and they're not making drugs.
They have 8 million followers that are dumb enough to listen to them. So like all of these things that you're saying are 100% facts.
But it doesn't start there.
100%, but it is something that has to be considered. You're not wrong at all, but we already had however many several dozen slave movies. Like we get it, we get what happened.
But even this is not even slavery though. This is 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Right, and they're all the effects of slavery along with a whole bunch of other things that everyone at the stabilizer is aware of. All I'm saying is somebody got to get held accountable. And that doesn't mean, and I don't think that means chastise children as much as it means employ them. See, where I was going was, yeah, it's gonna take the galvanizing of a people to get to where the old guy was talking about, but ultimately the old guy and the rest of his baby boomer friends gotta come up with some change. So we can like start hiring these kids because they have the time to do all this dumb stuff because they don't have anything else worth doing.
I don't think it's even about with respect to our elders. I don't think it's about even the older guys, because in that film at that point, I'm gonna say he's probably in his 70s, right? The elder. You have to submit to the younger generation. And I think there's a submission that has to happen, a handoff in other communities, in other environments that we don't necessarily have in a Black community, where it's like, all right, the younger generation is going to take over here. Y'all can rest assured this is gonna be good, right? We don't have that. And I think that's the missing link there. We're talking as if we are set up in this country, we were set up in this country to succeed from the beginning. I don't think that was the case. So we can't have this conversation in the same terms that other races could have that same conversation, right? We can't do that.
Yeah, because they got a certain level of leeway that we didn't. I mean, the Italians were able to organize, sell all the drugs they wanted to the point where they got to build Las Vegas and go do it over there.
You're right, but a lot of that has to do with how they treat each other culturally too.
I'd argue that because ultimately the police weren't hunting them from when they got here. Now they were able to infiltrate police because they had the complexion for the protection, and they did what they could. Now we are hunted. It's different. Anything we do has like consequences. Even if we're not doing anything wrong, we have consequences. And so these people were allowed to become politicians and police and FDNY and working for the city and working for the mayor. And I think they were able to take advantage of all these things and just kind of have a footing within whatever cities that we're conducting. And I don't think we ever were allowed that much leeway as Black people.
So I think all you guys are correct, right? And I think, any way you spin it, I think you can view it through a different lens. You can figure out a solution that may work for some but may not work for others. But we also recognize this film was set late 80s, early 90s, right? 2, 3, 4 decades later, we're still dealing with some of these same challenges, right? And so some people say vote. And that doesn't necessarily bring out the kind of results that we want. Other people say, put more jobs in the community, and that doesn't always, bring the,
or go to college.
Right. There's all these solutions, and yet, you mentioned even as a culture for Black folks to come together, but we've seen time and time again that doesn't always work, right? Whether it's Black Lives Matter. We have leaders, but not everybody comes together. And so we seem like we're in this cyclical kind of pattern where, do you feel like there is an actual opportunity to come out of where we're at?
See, this is all good. And I think about what you mentioned with the responsibility of the elders, and you also said Furious. And so it makes me think about to Trey and how he went to live with his father to have a better life. That's what his mom wanted for him. And Furious even talks about later how that's the advantage that Trey has over his other friends. And we see how their lives play out in the movie. So I'm curious to know, and I'm gonna ask you, Nyla, from a mother's perspective, what role does fatherhood, you think, play in this discussion?
It's a major role. Unfortunately, a lot of kids do not get to experience that. And for that has a lot of, it's the reasons why a lot of things are happening. For me, I wasn't raised with my father, but I had my mother. And I always used to think, I don't need my father. I don't need a man. My mom did everything. I had my grandparents. And just as I got older, I started to see in relationships that I had where things were lacking and why they were lacking. I had this whole vision where I didn't need him. I didn't need him. You did whatever to my mother. I'm cool on you. You weren't around. You never tried to be around. You tried to hit me up on Facebook, weirdo stuff. So I'm good. But as much as I kept telling myself it would not affect me, I see it now as I'm getting older, how much it has. So with me having my son at the time when I was living in LA with my son's father, things didn't work out, and I was just kind of checked out. I'm like, I'm moving back to New York. But I always made it my mission to say no matter where I was, he would always have access to his father. I will never deny his father anything. Anytime he wants to talk to him, to see him, I've explained to my son what was going on, why I had to move. I never made it seem like it was anyone's fault. Whatever him and I went through, I will never let my son see that. And a lot of women, unfortunately, don't do that with their kids. And they paint this horrible narrative of their son's father, whether they are trying or whether they're not trying. I always wanted my son to form his own opinion on his father. When you get older, you can be told whatever as a boy, but when you get older as a man, you start to realize what's real and what's not real. And I want you to find that on your own. So I've never, ever kept him away. Even in the relationship that I had when I was out here, it took the man that I was with time to realize how to, to be like a father to him. And I kept comparing him to my son's father. And I'm like, I can't do that. This man is trying. So I was fortunate enough, even though I was out here, to still have a man around him. But as my son got older, I'm like, he needs his father. So I had to make a hard decision in January to send him out there to go to school with his father, which was something I didn't want to do because I just felt like, he's 9, he still needs his mother, he still is. But I just realized, my son kind of indirectly was just like, I need dad. I love you and I love being here, but it was just getting to that point where he needed his father. So I made the decision to send him out there because at the end of the day, like I said, I'm never gonna stop my son from having a healthy relationship with his father because I know the effects of what it does for little boys and little girls. So that's a big deal. Men. Yeah.
And I'm curious, you mentioned obviously he needs his father, but even more specifically, what are the tools that you feel as though your child's father can do that maybe you can't?
Where do I start? things happen as a little boy, you know? And me being a woman, me being his mother, my first thought is to be like, oh, and shun it, and to, you know, and as a man, you guys wouldn't approach that situation in that way. It's just sometimes it's a delicacy from a man that's gonna happen with you guys just experiencing that. And I don't wanna cause any trauma to him for situations that he had no control over, or that I should have come to him in a different way that I wouldn't have been able to as a woman. Because I'm always gonna have my own perspective. So I wanna give him the chance to be able to really understand what it is to be a man and to grow as a man and the things that are happening. And I could not do that authentically alone. So.
And I think we all saw that play out, obviously, in the film. We saw the difference between Trey and Furious and his friends who didn't have fathers. And I'm curious, you know, when we talk about this dynamic of, you know, urban environment, the hood, how influential do you all feel as though Black men, Black fathers play? And I think not only we talk about biological fathers, right, but folks talk about OGs in their neighborhood, or just folks like a Furious who may have to be fathers to the community.
Yeah, I mean, I'm there. I could tell you right now, just full disclosure, I don't know my father. Don't know what he looked like. I don't know what he sound like. I don't know anything about him. For $1 million, you could put 5 people, 5 Black men in a room and line them up on the wall, and one of them was my dad, and I couldn't tell you which one was, for $1 million. I think, though, damn, that's real. I'm about to be overcome with something. I think what also it is it's about breaking those cycles. So yeah, right, like, first off, Furious, like, let's be very clear, like, he's not Uncle Phil, he's not Carl Winslow. This dude is very serious. Like, if you leave probably a dish in the sink unwashed, you're gonna get reamed for it. He looks very militant. His background is military in the movie and stuff like that. But I think probably I would have preferred that than nothing at all. I think I probably at least look at that as the fathers in, like, some of these cliches, some of these, 80s, 90s Black films, right, that kind of talk about the hood. And look at, like, yo, he's probably, if not the best example of a father, then, like, a damn good close. It's not just a father in regards to middle America fathers. This is you in the trenches father. This is, you got to keep your daughter off the pole father. You got to keep your son off the corner father, which requires a different level of finesse, of drip that you can't find in Carl Winslow or, you know what I'm saying, Philip Banks, respectfully, RIP. But what I also think about some of that stuff here is, like, looking at it is like, man, mom's had to take herself and put herself in a vulnerable position, just like you and I got, like, when you were talking, I would just be, like, I was just in your atmosphere. Like, I was in your orbit. Like, when you were talking that, I was like, wow, if my mom did that for me, what would have happened? Yeah. Like, and I'm saluting you, like, 1,000%, giving you all the energy, all the blessings. I'm gonna pray for you tonight. Thank you. And your family, because, like, that's a real decision that we don't get to see a lot of. We don't hear that side. We hear just the anger, angry, bitter, torn, tattered relationship that is not our narrative. That's a narrative that the majority wants us to be portrayed as, but that's not our narrative as Black people. And so I salute you for that and coming to that conclusion, and I respect you on that, like, 100%. But also, it's like, I had to find that through other means. So I had to go, thank God I had, like, the PAL program, Pleats Athletic League in Brownsville, Brooklyn. So I was able to find male figures that I was able to pull pieces from each of them and say, okay, I want that, I want that, I want that, I want that. And I was able to pull from these men who were not my father figures, but they were in my life, that I was able to make it through in this place that was real tough, that was real, that was barren, but I was able to do it. And I think I pulled from them that I was able to build my character from where it is today. I wouldn't be the same person I am if I hadn't decided, hey man, I'm just follow the streets, or, you know what? There's more for me out here, and I gotta find it. And I'm still looking today, 38 years old, still looking. I salute you, Queen.
Thank you.
I appreciate you sharing that, because we keep talking about how this is a cyclical cycle. My fathers in my life my entire time. My parents were married, but he did not know his father. And so I didn't know it at the time, but he was, as we all know, doing the best that he could, right? He was not big on emotion. He was not big on I love yous. And, you know, I think we all know a full embrace versus a pat when you hug someone. Like, that was who he was. And I appreciate for what he was, but of course I always wanted more. And I think I got that from my mom. But obviously hearing your two experiences, once again, it paints this full breadth of why we need these figures in our individual lives and our community. Going back to some of the challenges that are in our communities, we can see how when things are disjointed, how, you know, maybe someone does start to do something, you know, seek employment that may not be the most ideal, but he's just trying to figure it out, right? And so it just constantly, you know, we can point fingers at why, but that's all I know. And I don't necessarily have anyone to tell me that's not right.
Are you talking about like selling drugs? Are you talking about like...
I mean, it could be anything. Selling drugs is one thing, making music is one thing, or it's just, you know, maybe you decide, you know, school is not for you. You're just figuring things out. I don't even, you know, it could be anything. You're just trying to make it, you know, and I think, you know, Boyz in the Hood was about a lot of young men trying to make it the best way they knew how. Young men and young women, you know, but we saw through different families how it looked different. Yeah. And some people ultimately didn't make it. Some people went to jail, they came out and they tried to fix it, you know, and I think it shows, like I said, I was not born or raised in an urban environment. And I think that shapes us as well, right? I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey, right?
Yeah, I grew up in the hood in New York.
Right. So in my environment, I was one of the few Black people, right? But I also went to church in a more urban environment. So suburbs of New Jersey, went to church in Newark. My family is from Newark. And so I always had kind of
ties to it.
Yeah, I always had the full breadth. So I never was far from my community, but I think, you know, then working in corporate America, it's nothing for me to navigate, right? I don't personally ascribe to code switching. I've been using that word a lot recently, but it's just life. But I recognize everybody lives different. And I recognize our environment shapes so much about us. And, you know, I know the things that you do, your environment has shaped your experience. And so how has that evolved the way you live?
Well, quite frankly, like, to put it plainly, you know, I was raised in a household with both my parents. I'm first generation immigrant as well. So it was like a pressure to make something of yourself. But my father was very much in my life. He was a tough dad. Like, he's like furious. Definitely do what you gotta do. He's like second-degree black belt. And I guess he's an artist himself in a lot of ways, but growing up, we bumped heads a lot. Me and my dad didn't really get along too much, but I'm so grateful for him being there and challenging all of my young thoughts. I understand him so much more now as an adult, but if my father wasn't there, I'd 1000% be in jail, like, for sure. I was a hothead. I was getting kicked out of pretty much every school I went to. I was fighting. I was doing a lot more than that, but we'll just keep it there. And my dad was there for me. You know, he didn't judge me. He definitely told me about myself. I definitely was reprimanded time and time again. But just to know that he had my back, even when I was at my lowest, meant everything. My grandfather was in my life too. I'm actually his namesake. So it's deep, you know? So it's like, to have those men in my life, my uncles in my life, I think anything that I ever said that I was thinking about doing can become a conversation, and they can help me navigate, even if it was just conversation. But it became that much more real to me to do it. Even in my entrepreneurial journey now, my uncle's an entrepreneur, my father's an entrepreneur. These are just things that I just know that without their guidance, especially raised in the hood that I was raised in Washington Heights, which is like right past Harlem. There's a lot of influences in those streets. I have a lot of friends that weren't raised with their fathers. I just celebrated one of my boys coming out of jail yesterday. So it's real. And a lot of my friends are very intelligent. They just didn't have the guidance. I think mentorship and guidance is really everything. And my father literally just being there. I'm not saying he was the best dad either, but even when you're on the bench, you learn from others' mistakes. And so I was able to learn from his mistakes. He was able to point out mine, maybe a little too much in my personal opinion. But just being able to go back and forth with someone that actually cares about you and that might know you better than you know yourself because you're of this person, man, that has really, really, really helped me get a hold of my life.
It's funny, like, we're still dealing with gentrification stuff, like, when that movie came out in, like, 92 or 91 or something like that.
Right.
Man, to me, it just says, like, there's something that we're doing that if, like, we change, like, one or two things, we'd, like, be able to address this as, like, a people. And ultimately, I think it's, our youth need a reason to, like, value themselves. So, like, they value us as a group. And at that point, I think some form of unity can manifest if we could find a reason to unite. And I think ultimately, Furious Styles stands in between the elder and Trey and Doughboy and understands both sides. But, like, we've understood stuff for, like, 2-3 decades at this point. Like, there's enough understanding. There needs to be, like, action. And I think action starts with the people who have the energy to commit to action. And a lot of times that's young people. Some elders will surprise you, but, like, I don't know, I think there's a lot at stake when it comes to, like, our youth.
I think the thing that you keep saying is unity. So I feel you. It's gonna come down to that, essentially.
So y'all definitely mentioned a couple of great points. I know we didn't settle on one main theme, but there were some good options out there just for different ways that we can advance our communities. And I think the important theme, actually I got a theme for y'all, unity. And that's a lot of what you were saying. I think what's important is to remember your individual role, like Nyla with her son, your father with you, the men that poured into you, and even your mentions about these influential people on social media and actually taking that influence seriously and just speaking and pouring into the community in that way, in the ways that your parents have helped you as well. And I think if everyone just took on their individual roles, we could start there. Because I think a lot of times people look at it as, okay, we all have to do this in order for something effective to occur. But the effective part is, I'm gonna quote my man Michael, start with the man in the mirror. Just one person though, really, that's all it takes because those people affected your lives and your life and your life, you know what I'm saying? So I'm really grateful for this conversation because I think it was the seed or at least the water that's gonna add to some unknown person's life and it's gonna be the thing that helps our community get closer and closer to the goal. So I definitely don't want us to feel helpless at all. Like I want us to feel empowered. Y'all agree?
Absolutely.
This is a good conversation.
All right, y'all, so we're gonna talk about Boyz in the Hood, but before we get out there, I wanna talk about what y'all favorite hood classic is. And I'm gonna start, my favorite is Friday. I feel like for me, Friday laid the groundwork. It was funny, in ways you could relate to, even though I didn't grow up in the hood per se, I felt like still I could relate to the parent dynamics, the girlfriend situation and whatnot. So Friday is like the flagpole for me, but Fred, I'm gonna start with you. What do you think what's your favorite hood classic?
I mean, it's hard to pick a favorite of all of them, but I guess I could run with New Jersey Drive right now. That's really one of my favorites, executive produced by Spike Lee. I think it was one of the first times we got a peek into what's happening in the hood of New Jersey. We always get to see New York and LA in movies, but the surrounding areas not so much. And I think it was just really intriguing to see that what these kids were doing when they had a lot of time on their hands in Newark.
Crazy thing is I'm from Jersey. I don't know if I've ever seen that one.
Wow.
Bruh, you shouldn't have said that live.
It's cool, but I'm gonna have to check when you think about, I guess, what makes that movie different from other ones, what do you feel like is different?
Well, I think what those kids were up to was a bit different in terms of what we're used to seeing on camera. It was based on true stories as well. Yeah, it was, a lot of those kids there were hot wiring and stealing cars and taking them to chop shops. Like, that was a thing. That was happening a lot in the Bronx too. But in Newark, that was like, you know, you leave your car for 10 minutes, it's probably gone. It was like a thing for a while.